When we look at the livestock commodity, 50% of the global agriculture output in value terms will come from livestock in the next 10 years. Currently, we're at 40. When we go to the region, SADC holds about 6% of the world's cattle population, but produces only about 3% of the world's beef. Of this, 35% is held by Tanzania, with a herd of about 35%, but produces only about 15% of the region's beef. Sorry, I've got a problem with my eyes. South Africa is Africa's largest beef producer, ranking at 13 globally, with a market share of 2%. SADC, in the last 2015-2016 drought, lost about 1% of its total cattle population. Okay, so I think earlier on today, I think we did explain that Southern Africa Regional Roundtable for Sustainable Beef is a regional story. Just some information, we've got Malawi, and when we look at Malawi, one of the things that we're looking at is disease control, as well as production and productivity, improved productivity. Mozambique, we will be looking at improving the production and productivity and also the product, which is the meat. But at the same time, we need to increase the numbers because this is a country that's, I think, mainly importing from South Africa. Zambia is a situation where, while we do have large commercial entities, but I think amongst our smallholders, there are issues of disease control, as well as improving the productivity of most of our farmers. Namibia exports to the EU, but what we find is there is quite a number of animals that are in what we call the red zone, and this is an area that we need to work with to see how we can get that meat out, either for export within the region or to the international world. Swaziland was exporting to the EU, but because of FMD, they are not exporting. So FMD, I think, as was told, is something that we need to work with and see how we can, I'm not sure if we can eradicate it, but work around it and be able to export, but also reduce the amount of effect that it has on our livestock movements and the effect that it has on the meat industry in the region. Botswana also has issues with FMD, but it's also one of the other countries that is able to export to the EU. They have a quota with the EU, so we need to help them and see how we can increase the number of animals that are able to access this market. Zimbabwe, FMD comes in as well, but apart from that, we also see tick-borne diseases being quite on the rampage right now. So we're looking at how we can work with them as well and see how this can be controlled. As was earlier said, Southern Africa is one group to a certain extent in terms of the people. What we can see from this farm, which is from this map, which is shows us the people that have lived there for years, the different kingdoms, and their migration. So what you find is the people that you find in Zambia, you'll find groups of them in Southern Africa, you find groups of them in Zimbabwe. So basically, let's just explain that we are one people, but living in different countries today. Thank you. When we look at the most high producing countries in the SADC region, we have South Africa as the highest, followed by Zambia, then Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Namibia. But in terms of exports, we have South Africa exporting the highest, and surprisingly enough, followed by Mozambique, Lesotho, Namibia, and Swaziland. The countries that import most of our beef are the Netherlands, Spain, the United Kingdom. Namibia does import quite a bit of beef as well, and Belgium.
Okay, thanks, Christine. I'll take over from you now. Just to analyze the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that we have in Southern Africa and as a Southern African Roundtable. Agriculture is used to diversify and drive the economy. Strengths I'm starting with. Population growth and urbanization is driving the consumption of beef. Beef byproducts such as offals are a delicacy in Southern Africa, and we have an immensely diverse and rich animal stock. If we move to our weaknesses, poor infrastructure and transport networks, high cost of setting up and maintaining infrastructure, high dependence on government and donor financial support. Now, I always stop at this. In most of Africa, we have the legacy of colonization from many years ago, and the governments controlled everything that happened. And with the advent of independence, a lot of decisions made were political, and the people expected things for free. So what happens is it started off with governments. Governments then stopped providing because they ran out of money, and then there's been a lot of donor community financial support. Now, the problem with the donor community, whilst it's appreciated what they do, is that a lot of the projects that come to Africa are thought up thousands of miles away. And when the funding runs out, so does the project. You tend to find that NGOs, sorry, Christine, in these countries, as soon as the project's finished, they go, because you've got a situation where you've got someone whose job is they're not allowed to generate a profit, trying to teach a farmer how to generate a profit. And because of the way that the donor community work, they don't give money or deal directly with the private sector. They're only just changing this status now. So we tend to get pushed out of the space where the smallholder farmer is. Another weakness is limited access to financial services. Again, because there's no traceability, a bank is not going to lend against an animal, because, you know, I bring my 20 animals here and the bank lends me money, and then I drive them to Christine's farm tomorrow, and then the bank goes there and sees the same 20 animals and then lends her money as well. Coming to opportunities, beef will benefit regional and international export opportunities. Beef production will be driven by increasing use of ICT, something that was we talked about this morning. There are other products like live cattle grading that we'll also be dealing with. Rural farmers remain a dominant consumer segment. Increased urbanization and population growth will continue to drive demand in beef. Threats, El Niño and La Niña, there's supposed to be an A there. You know, in the past we'd have the odd drought here and there. We had a devastating drought in 1992 where we culled half the national herd in Zimbabwe. But it seems as if now it's a common occurrence. There's either El Niño there or a La Niña year, and I don't understand why that is, but it is certainly a threat to us. Food security, obviously a challenge for the region. You find that large-scale agriculture, whether it be individual or corporate, is not very high, with the exception of South Africa. Livestock diseases are a problem. When governments have no money, they tend to brush diseases under the carpet. So the press will be telling you there's an outbreak of theileriosis, but the government will be saying there isn't, although there'll be pictures of cattle that have died from these diseases. cattle feed, there's a big move towards the whole element of feeding cattle. And with maize, we've got the armyworm, which is wreaking havoc amongst our farmers. And the last one, of course, the biggest threat is the fact that people keep cattle as a measure of prestige and not as an economic asset. The market chain of cattle and goats in Zimbabwe, the constraint, this is pretty straightforward. It's information is the biggest problem we have, but it seems as if legislation and everything points to trying to keep the communal farmers out of becoming commercial cattle farmers. Talking specifically about the Southern African Roundtable, it was launched in Malawi. The members are Malawi, Zambia, Swaziland, Namibia, Mozambique, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. Our objectives are a unified body with regard to the beef sector involving all the participating member states and realizing that their independence is there and that we should come together to solve our problems. Specifically, we bring together, coordinate multi-stakeholder actors and interests, advocate for greater recognition and investments. Advocacy at government level is something we're trying to coordinate, where we come up with a combined position for Southern Africa so that our different governments fall into line. Stakeholders will avoid replication. I think they should replicate. So if there's a project or something that's worked well in Zambia, we should look at replicating it in Zimbabwe to the best of our abilities, rather than spending 5 years to come up with the same thing that they were doing 5 years prior to us. Partners in the sector will have a platform where they can share experiences, lessons, and challenges and have collective solutions to rescue the situation out of the threats surrounding the sector. To date, we have a board which is in place for the next 2 years. It was elected into being a month ago, just over a month ago. We have a president, a vice president, and a treasurer. The committees that we have, which is led by one of those three, is finance and resource mobilization, admin and communications, and technical. We're recruiting members across the value chains. For example, in the Zimbabwean roundtable, the board consists of producer, animal health company, advocacy expert, a banker, and an abattoir, the off-taker, and a research institution. Countries are at different levels. And we work with consumers on information, on quality and grading of meat, awareness campaigns, and marketing systems. We can talk about also, we're using a lot of IT. We're taking systems that are out there in the world and just picking what we can take from them. So we're not actually having to invent anything. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're just taking parts of what the rest of the world is doing and using them in our situations. Oh, sorry. I'm moving on my computer, sorry about that. After that quick spiel, I'll just talk about our conception to consumption model. Now, what we're saying in Africa is predominantly in most African countries, history has worked against us. The small-scale farmer, which is the majority of the animals that have always been on the continent, have been held back as not economic assets, but idle assets. Now, what we've got to do is, the first thing we've got to do is capacity build the farmer. I think the farmers need to understand that their animals are worth something. Because they haven't been brought into a commercial environment, they believe that an animal is only sold in times of hardship. You wouldn't believe the number of people that have animals in Africa that die of old age. Forget about disease, purely because it's not going to be sold. The farmer will sit and watch this animal grow older and older and older and eventually die and say, it died. The meat will be buried or burnt, and that's it. So people don't realize that commercial value. The economics of it. It is cheaper to farm cattle in some of our more arid regions than it is to grow maize, whereas people will insist, with the government's insistence, to try and grow maize, which they'll never make any money on. The second thing we do is training in public animal health care, primary animal health care at Extension. What basically has happened is a farmer will be able to tell you the life cycle of a disease. On Monday it will do this. By Tuesday it'll be doing that. By Thursday it'll be doing that. By Sunday it's dead. They understand what happens and they can pick up at the first sign of disease what's happening to an animal, but they can't tell you what the disease is called, and they can't treat the disease. So through primary animal health care, with detection, they can report in and the diseases can be dealt with and mortality rates can go down. We also teach the guys about natural resources, management and nutrition. The great thing about coming here is Southern Africa is, for some reason, it's all about the feedlot. People think if you don't have a feedlot, then you can't take an animal to an abattoir. To the extent that the donor community and the NGOs are building single animal feedlots on people's farms. This is absolutely ridiculous. I think maybe it's come about as a result of the fact that although South Africa produces 2% of the world's beef, I'd say 95% of that is feedlot based. They have massive feedlots down in the Free State at Sparta, at Karen, where they hold 40,000 animals at a time that are being fed for the market. We have lots of grass in Africa. It's just a question of managing it, making sure there are no veld fires, people burning the grass every year to plant their maize, and we'll succeed on that behalf, on that regard. Genetics, interesting thing I learned a few weeks ago, which I didn't realize, and has come out in today's presentation, is that African cattle produce the most greenhouse gases. Now, that, I believe, is as a result of the inbreeding and the genetics. Our feed conversion is not very good. One of the things we do in our conception to consumption is we introduce bulls and a little bit of AI into the community. By breeding for animals that have better feed conversion, we're saving the environment, not eating as much grass, and therefore improving the herd. On animal health, we make sure that the farmers have access to the correct drugs. I'm a bit dishonest here because I do have an animal health company, so it's part of my bottom line to make sure this does happen. Antimicrobial resistance is a big thing. You'll find that in a lot of countries in Africa, because of the laws are there, but there's a lack of control. And what happens is you walk into a shop and you can get your antimicrobials and pick them up off the counter and go and inject all your animals. So there's a lot of training to make sure that that's not being done. And finally, we have markets, direct access to markets. What's happening is farmers are because they've been told their animals aren't worth anything, they normally sell out of desperation. They need to pay school fees, somebody's gotten ill and needs to go to a clinic or a hospital. And what that has created is middlemen who come into these rural areas, some of them to buy one animal with a single cab pickup truck. And they'll buy an animal for $50, take it to the abattoir gate and be paid $500 to $600 for that same beast. The farmer is not incentivized to be in commercial production. So what we do is we bring the market to the farmers. So we take the abattoirs to the rural areas to get them to work with the farmers and buy cattle at the right price. The other thing we saw yesterday was camera grading. I mean, how great is that? In Africa, the problem is your animal passes the abattoir gate. I'm talking about if it's a rural farmer sometimes, and he's been told to feed it for 90 days. He's done that, but that's been sub-economical, and he gets a small amount of money because they deduct the amount of feed that they've given him, because the abattoir will just give you the feed regardless. And he doesn't understand. He thinks he's been cheated. But with the systems we've been seeing here, I understand it's mandatory in Ireland that cattle are graded by camera. At least the farmer will know that, look, this is what my animal graded at, as opposed to it disappears through the gate and that's the last you see of it until you're told how much you're being paid. That's basically what we do, and we're also working together as a region to advocate for change. I mean, Christine's got a few quick wins she was going to talk about.
I think it's the issue of the apps. We've got about 4 applications that we're developing. One of them is the live cattle grading. So we're basically trying to put up a grading system that will look at the live animals. Another one is called Farming Solutions. And this is where we guide the farmers step by step on how to produce certain crops. We've got a business solutions app, and this will basically try and help the farmers to manage their farms from a business point, input, output. And then we've also got an extension solution, which will look at information, weather, soil testing, diseases, marketing. So these are just some of the apps that we are trying to put together to help the farmers. Thank you.
Max and Christine, just a fascinating front row vantage point of an area that I think we all agree has amazing potential, and to hear it firsthand is just incredibly worthwhile. So do we have some questions for Max or Christine? We probably have time for two right now. One or two.
Thank you.
I think you like it.
Okay, I'll go first. I was going to ask this last time. I'm just curious, and the EU I think will be similar because you have different countries all together. So what are the difficulties you run into? Obviously, you have other challenges as a region, but what are the specific issues you run into when you're trying to work between countries, with multiple countries?
Actually, funnily enough, it's not so bad when we get round a table. We throw around this whole, Christine mentioned it earlier, this Ubuntu thing, and we all say we're all brothers and sisters, so let's all work together, start the meeting, and it tends to go quite well. I think we're quite lucky that we don't have any big egos as such on our boards, so people don't try and dominate. We do discuss things and get them through. But I think what we're trying to do is make sure that we have a common vision, a common purpose, and that animals can cross freely between countries and we can export, etc. I think with the EU, I think it might be a lot easier because they've already got rules and regulations with regard to the European Union. So we don't have too many problems. No, what we do is we have different statutory issues, but we deal with them.
I think the other advantage that we have is we've got the SADC, because the southern region all belongs to the SADC protocol. So whatever it is that we discuss and put together, we will have the audience of going to the SADC to present. And right now, as Max has said, we haven't run into any issues or problems, whether it's from a regulation point.
Max, this morning you spoke fairly eloquently about Southern Africa needing to lead itself and not relying on others, and kind of breaking the mindset of, putting the hands out and asking. What do you think is the first step to transcending that?
From one point of view, obviously it's from the farmers themselves. It's teaching them that the animals have a value. But I think it's more coming to functions like this and events like this and basically saying, we're not sticking our hand out. You guys have done the work. You've got the data. You know how things work. We're saying, please share that with us. If we have an issue, help us. My business partner on the pedigree breeding side said to me, Max, when you go to Ireland, please bring some Simmental semen back. So it's understanding that there's good quality animals out here and things have been done, and we'll look at the breeding values and all that, and I've been told the name of the company and be able to buy some semen and take it back. I'm not saying donate it to us. I'm saying let us come and buy it and take some of your genetics back to where we come from. Advise us. Give us technical assistance, but don't give us money. This may sound very odd. Teach us to fish.
Pete.
Hi, Pete Garber. I head up the McDonald's agriculture team in the UK and Ireland. And when we're talking about farmers, we work with over 20,000 beef farmers across the UK and Ireland. And you guys must work with a huge amount more farmers. Yeah. And they all have diverse opinions, but farmers are at the heart of being able to change practices and deliver the sustainability that we all require within beef production. How do you find that that's received by farmers, these kind of messages? Have you got a groundswell of support from farmers, or do you see momentum building, and are you able to create farmer advocacy amongst farmers? Because I find that's the best way that farmers will take on the message.
What we do is the NGOs, as they are very good at mobilizing the farmers, because you call the farmers to a meeting. If an NGO calls them, they think there's something that's going to be given to them. We then come along and preach our sermon about conception to consumption and what we want to do with the farmers. And invariably you'll find that initially in a crowd, let's say a crowd of 100 people, you will find 5 that are exceptionally keen on it, and you'll find maybe another 10 who are, their ears prick up. But you'll find 85% will just say, yeah, we went there and they gave us a Coke and some food afterwards and walked away. But what thing we do find is that in Africa, people are very visual. And we've seen a lot of it where we've placed bulls in community where the farmer who has the bull, suddenly his progeny are really good. So there's an explosion in terms of the bull's genes going into that rural setting. And then suddenly everybody wants to be part of it. So because cattle is a long process, we're quite used to it. So you get a few people will come on board initially, very keen, and will do very well for us because they will get the best results. And then everybody else wants a bit of the action.
Maybe just to add on, one of the other things that has worked for some of the other agricultural lines is the market. So what we hope to work through is establish very clear regulations, clear market policies. And we foresee that once that is done, then we should be able to see a change in people. So you've got the commercial, you've got the semi-commercial. They understand that they're in business. But now we've got the traditional livestock keepers who, as Max say, will sell when there's a need. So we would want to bring these in to sell when they need to sell because the animal has reached the market value. But then we need to make sure that the marketing system is very clear and that they'll be able to take their animals and get what is the value for it. And work with the banks so that they can keep the money in the bank.